Hi, good morning, everyone. We have lots of people here in person and probably lots who are going to watch the recording. Today we have Irene Heffel leading. So I will mute myself and turn it over to Irene.
Thanks, Tricia. Hi, everyone. Welcome to your fourth day of the series, and I thank you for your commitment. It's that time of the year, but still, it's always good. You're lifelong learners, all of you, so that's really wonderful. I as on Monday, I talked about question of the day as part of a routine that you want to create in your classroom, no matter what grade you're teaching. And before we do that, I'd like to just make sure that we acknowledge where we live. Today, we acknowledge the lands we share with the Indigenous people, including the Métis, the Inuit, and all other ancestors who have made these lands their home. As we gather within these territories, we are thankful for all that sustain us and provide for us at this time of year. We are thankful for new beginnings, new life, and new opportunity provided. In the essence of reconciliation, we acknowledge these territorial lands of Treaties 6, 7, and 8. So that's an important piece to think about and reflect on. Today, the thought for today, before we get really going into the nitty-gritty of nonfiction, I want you to choose 3 words. 3 words is good, that describe your first day of teaching. And as I was looking at this, I've got a word written here that I just said ignorant. And that's the first word that came to my mind. But if you wouldn't mind sharing a word or 3 about your first day of teaching ever, and we can see it in the chat, that would be great. Yeah, scared, nervous, help. Light speed, routine, fresh, shiny. Ignorant is great. What words, hey? Those are great. Yeah, fast. Exactly, yes. Excited, nervous, scared, hopeful, hectic. And it was memorable, wasn't it? Yes, nonstop. And when you were there on the first day, everyone just assumed, here, you need to do this, you need to sign that, do this. It's like, okay, I think that's why you need time to develop your teaching style. So I do appreciate your contributions, that's for sure. Thank you so much. And I'm relieved that I felt those pieces too. So as I said, I teach ed students at Concordia. So I think I might save some of these words and just sort of say, here's how you're going to feel on your day. The students go into their practicum for 2 weeks in September, right off the bat at Concordia. So we'll see how that goes. So thank you very much. Today I'm going to look at the whole notion of teaching nonfiction. Nonfiction, and I'm focusing on writing, and I'm going to focus on the outcomes for grade 4. It's really important to look at that nonfiction. So if we could move forward there, Tricia. Why nonfiction? And this wants to be something that's really a critical part of the work that you do in a year. And so yesterday someone had said, how many book studies do we do? And I thought I would do a novel study and a nonfiction novel study. And they exist. Definitely, they're out there. In a world like this, nonfiction is out there. It's everywhere you look. Some things we think are based on fact, and they aren't. But it's a real place that we need to go to. And in my day, it was we did a research unit in October, and we researched the research that's all been researched on the animal that we picked. And so no one does research like that. I learned over time, you, child, need to come up with a question. And that's how we do research. We have a question, we have a what if, and then we pursue that. And so those are some, there are some important things to understand and remember about nonfiction. It is based on fact. It's the biggest category of reading, writing, and viewing. And don't forget as well, I'm focusing on writing, but you've got to do the comprehension outcomes and the writing together. Because if I want to write nonfiction, I need to be able to read it and see how it's organized and look at the various pieces in it. We know that nonfiction is full of pictures and captions and graphs and sidebars and all sorts of things. And we learn how to read those pieces. Sometimes, depending on what we're doing, nonfiction gets us flipping through and looking for specific information. And so scanning and skimming is a very important comprehension strategy for something like this. Many, many categories: biography, cooking, business, health and fitness, crafts, pets, you name it, history, self-help, science. There's all sorts of pieces in nonfiction that, and that should say music, by the way, I missed. So there are many, many areas to go. And if you're teaching cross-curricularly, that's even better. So that you can add things to the work that you're doing. Why would we study nonfiction? Why would we teach that to our students? It's to learn or teach. It's to inform, explain, describe, or instruct. And we can ask our students to do each of those purposes. Today you're informing. On this assignment, you're going to instruct. And we don't necessarily always have to give lengthy assignments. We teach our students that more compact text can say a lot. And you can read nonfiction in any order, and it has huge text features that are so different from the fiction that students are exposed to. So that's a place that's something I want you to think about and reflect. Where will I put this in my work? What do I do already that I'm going to continue? Maybe I'll enhance it. What will I do to create a nonfiction unit? Maybe I'll create 2 nonfiction components in my year where students read and write nonfiction, and they should be reading what you want them to write. That's that whole modeling component. Okay, so the next piece is going to be about the critical study. So a critical study is important. It's not just we read the book now, it's the critical study of nonfiction. Because of that, we need to be able to instruct our students in skill sets that allow them to access nonfiction. Specialized vocabulary is important, and visual depictions of information is really, really critical. Even a photograph is something that we need to learn how to analyze and look at and question. So the critical study is what I'm talking about here, that needs to be very deliberate and intentional in terms of the work we do with our students. And something I've always advocated for is to do genre study with your students. Get books and say, this is narrative because why? This is nonfiction because why? They need to tell you what the genre is and how do they know that. We know that narrative, if you looked at a book cover, narrative contains the name of the character usually. Sometimes it will contain the problem. Narrative is to entertain, and it's about character problem solution. And so I can tell that Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good Day is fiction because Alexander's in the title, and so is the problem. When we look at nonfiction, we see usually photographs, graphs, charts, and we see what the text is going to be about in the book cover. This is called The Life of the Polar Bear or something like that. And that's to inform people. So even those pieces, they sound simple to us, but our students need to talk about what genre they're in, what they are reading, what are the characteristics of such. And even something like fiction and nonfiction, it's a good idea to look at side-by-side books where you might have even short stories, a short story about someone who goes to space and then followed by an article about space travel or something like that. So side by side really helps our students to understand these are two different pieces. The common piece might be content, and then things change after that. So if we look at critical exposure, so that's that critical analysis, and now we talk about critical exposure to informational texts. This is a certain writing style, and a lot of students struggle with it. In grade 9 in the PATs, a lot of students will choose the narrative component over the other because it's that thing over there that I struggle with. I think it's hard, and I think we really need to give balance to both, like big balance, serious things. So it's definitely a writing style that students struggle with, and it's something that we need to do. The slides are not the outcomes. These are just my comments about why nonfiction is important, and I'll get to the outcomes in a minute. So I just want to write some notes. So here are the organizing ideas for grade 4 regarding nonfiction. So text structures and forms, you'll definitely find, identify and apply text forms and structure. In comprehension, text comprehension is supported by applying varied strategies and processes and considering both context and themes. So the organizing ideas are very much there. They very much fit the whole notion of teaching nonfiction in your classroom. And this both are that reading and writing together component that we want to be really cognizant of. So when we get to the learner outcomes, these are the pieces that we assess through cusps. So students examine how the form and structure of text can support the communication of ideas and information. What a strong connection to nonfiction. Through what I ask you to do, through performance assessment, through different assessments, whether formative or summative, I'm going to report out to parents about how well your child examines the form and structure. The other piece is, again, students investigate strategies and connections that support text comprehension. Once again, I need to use certain strategies when I know what genre I'm reading from. I know I'm reading nonfiction. I know how to skim and scan. I know how to get in there and get some information, which is different than reading a chapter 1 to get the gist of what you think might be happening in the rest of the story. So these are the two learner outcomes in grade 4 that we assess and look at. But we look at the cusps to see how are we going to do this. So I took knowledge components out. And these are right from the program of studies. So a genre is a category of text that has a specific content or style and includes fiction and nonfiction. So there's a healthy emphasis on nonfiction in the program of studies, and it's throughout. So again, these are the kinds of things we want our students to know when they come out of a unit that you've taught them. Literary forms of fiction and nonfiction include novels, journal entries, media. And again, include is an important word to think about, such as is merely suggestive. But here we're going to do a novel study and write some journal entries, perhaps from the perspective of that polar bear. And of course, media is another kind of nonfiction study. We know that media texts, the comment is, would you suggest splitting the year into fiction and nonfiction instruction? Well, I would certainly consider a 50-50 deal, if you will. Depending on how you plan is fine. I might go back and forth. I usually plan my year with genre study. So I go, we're doing a play, we're going to do this and that. But I would make sure I've interspersed a balance of nonfiction along with fiction, with narrative. So if you plan like that, that would be fine as long as kids have got that mixture. I kind of like going back and forth because then it brings you can use their background knowledge when you do another unit. You can say, what are all the things that we know on about earthquakes? Let's do that first, that kind of thing. I like to have a theme and show both, absolutely. That's that whole side-by-side component, which I think would just be a good short piece to introduce and review throughout the year. So if I decide I'm going to do a play, that's the genre, and let's go back and look at the parts of the play and remember that this has got its own specific elements to it, and this is how you read it. So of course, text features are digital and non-digital, and they're full of images and graphics and indexes. And nonfiction includes autobiographies, procedural text, land, compare and contrast. Biographies can be nonfiction. There's what is it? Well, the Diary of Anne Frank, but there's another one about a girl from Croatia or Romania, the diary of her, Lata's diary or something like that. Those can be nonfiction. And just as an aside, I love the way Pierre Burton writes. Like, wouldn't it be neat to study one of his nonfiction books in school in social studies? And it would be nonfiction, but he certainly writes in a way that's, in my mind, very friendly. So we write compare and contrast, and as I said in the first slide, we've got nonfiction all around us. Music, we could certainly find out about a famous composer. And let's remember, I said research unit, and I don't mean that in any way that was done. When we asked kids to do a poster of Einstein and we draw his silhouette, and I got my kids to do that, and then a quote from him. And then I said, list 5 facts that you don't think the class knows about Einstein on 11 by 17. And then it was presented and shared. And that to me is finding an answer to a question. That research report piece that we've all sort of grown up with and had back in the day is not really conducive to inquiring and finding out, teaching the elements of research, evaluating information and gathering and note-taking, and all those pieces belong to the reading and writing of nonfiction. Okay, so this is still coming from the nonfiction texts can share opinions regarding information. Yeah, I need to speak about that. Procedural texts include, this is still from the program of studies, grade 4, recipes or instruction manuals. But if I want you to write a recipe for something, I need to show you what a recipe is. We need to read some published recipes and learn how to read them. And I did some work with a home ec teacher a few years back in a high school, and we created a handout, if you will, that took them through how to read a recipe, what kind of recipes are there, what does this mean? And it was a step-by-step piece. And, it just shows us that literacy instruction is everywhere. We do have an introduction, a main idea, supporting details, conclusion. Those structures include that. Nonfiction includes those pieces. And you can write a nonfiction piece and share an opinion regarding the information based on the facts that you presented in your nonfiction writing. And I look at these knowledge components, and it's so clear that this gives me a look at, okay, these are the kinds of things I want to put into my work for nonfiction. These are the pieces I need to teach. So if I'm in grade 5, I'm going to say, what was included in grade 4? That's the background knowledge component. What will I introduce in grade 5? And so on and so forth. The next piece, so I did the knowledge, and I'm going to discuss a little bit later the other pieces. Are there any thoughts about nonfiction? Are there any questions or contributions that are making you think of things in your own work? Okay, so Trisha's going to take you through this piece, and I'll just turn it over to her.
All right. Thanks, Irene. So I just wanted to take a little time and show you how this comes up in the curriculum. So if we go to that opening page of the curriculum, and as you see, I've signed in so that I'll be able to see all of the pieces, the resources and things that are attached to what I'm looking for. And the first thing I wanted to show you is that we can use the search button and search nonfiction. So let's have a look at what comes up when we do that. And what grades it's in. So grade 4, grade 3, grade 2 French immersion, up to grade 6. So it looks like it's in 4, 5, and 6. So I'm going to take us to one of the learning outcomes. No, let's go right to that skill and procedure where it comes up in grade 5. So in grade 5, and you see the piece that I clicked on is highlighted in orange. In grade 5, it says examine organizational structures of nonfiction texts. So this would be in the comprehension section, I believe. Just back it up a little bit. Oh, it's in text forms and structure. Sorry. My mistake. And discuss a variety of opinions regarding the structure, content, or source of information expressed in nonfiction texts. So this is just in text forms and structure. It comes up as how we look at a piece of nonfiction that we're learning about. I'm going to go back to that search though, because I want to look at it it also comes up in writing. So let's have a look at that. And this time I'm only going to look at it in English language arts. And let's see. This is the compare and contrast, investigate. So this is all reading parts, examine, read. So this is all comprehension now. And I'm not finding it in the writing part, but maybe I will go to that piece and have a look. I do want to make sure that we look at the resources. So let's just check. Okay, so there are some resources attached to nonfiction. Let's have a look at that before we go. These ones are books that are suggested in the curriculum that could possibly work well with grade 4, and it's a nonfiction piece. So when they say that it's information only, these are books that you can purchase. So it's not a website or someplace that they have linked to the curriculum. All right, I'm going to go back to the curriculum, and I'm going to go specifically to the writing part. I think I am. What have I done here? Sorry. Now look at that. My demonstration's not so smooth today. There we go. Okay. I'm going to go in English language arts and literature. I will, for this, pick grade 5. Then I want to scroll down to writing, which is the 8th one out of the 8th learning outcome out of 9. So you have to go down a little farther. Back up, sorry. All right, here we are in the writing piece. And if we remember that the circle with the eye inside of it gets you to some of the resources, we can have a look at some of the writing resources that are suggested. So remember, information only, these are suggested for purchase. And sometimes and there's an online resource, audience awareness, sample instructional ideas. So this might help a teacher instructing in the area of writing, and some of the resources that are suggested for purchase. That's a good place to have a look. I also wanted to point out that in all of the grades, the writing cusps are organized, they're organized in the row very specifically. If you look at this first row of cusps, they're generally about the writing process. If you look at the second row of cusps, it's generally creative. So this would be our narrative and poetry area where we would find those pieces. And then in the third row, this is where the nonfiction comes in. Writing to inform, explain, describe, or report for a variety of purposes and audiences. So this explains what a grade 5 and a grade 6 would need to be able to do with nonfiction writing. And that's in your third row of cusps. And then the last row is generally about the tools that students choose to use to express their writing. So they might print or keyboard or use cursive. And getting that idea that the tool that you use to express your message is part of your message. So, as I said before, the nonfiction is specifically in that third row of cusps for, I think it's 4, 5, and 6. Yep, it is. So it involves the research process and then how you share that research findings. All right, I think that was all that I wanted to show you for nonfiction and where to find those pieces exactly in the curriculum. Are there any questions about that? Does anyone want to add anything before I go on? All right. It's a little quieter in the chat today. All right. So back to Irene.
Can you do a quick repeat of the rows?
The rows? Sure. So underwriting, in the writing section, here's the single learning outcome under writing, a 1 learning outcome for each grade in writing. And each row of cusps, the first row is mainly about the writing process. So we ensure that students use the process to create their writing. It talks about what pieces students need to include, the paragraph writing in grade 4, and then it becomes a little bit more complex in 5 and 6. So that's row 1 is the process. Row 2 is about creative thinking. So this talks more about narrative and poetry and things like word choice and figurative language. Dialogue comes in here. So this is the creative part. Row 3 of the cusps involve research, and that's where the narrative comes in. And row 4 of the cusps talks about the tools that students use and how they express or share their writing, how they polish it, really. Sound good? Okay.
I just noticed that the next organizing idea is conventions.
Yes.
And so we really need to be cognizant of where we will put conventions in our work throughout the year. Uh,
Mhm.
Convention teaching needs to include mentor texts to show students what good comma placement looks like, and so on. And you still have the business as a teacher of prioritizing what grade whatever students really need to know. That is, this is what I want you to show me that I know. And mini lessons for conventions are wonderful. You could spend every morning, or depending on your timetable, we are going to focus on comma placement this week. Every morning, we're going to practice. I'm going to coach, but when you get to writing your nonfiction piece, that's something I'm going to look for when I assess your work. So we really want to slow down. We want to take one convention at a time, and we want to make sure that we're using mentor texts with conventions. Look at how wonderful the conversation goes, how it flows with the quotation marks that the author has used. So we really want to take a strong look at these and say, okay, here's what grade 5 needs to know. Here's what grade 4 did know. And that's where we go. And we focus a lot on the pieces like capitalization, abbreviations, parentheses, etc. That's what I'm looking at this year. And so that's why we need to deal with that. And use the proper use of conventions is about the good message. It's still part of creating a clear message to the people who are reading it. And it's really impossible to teach all the conventions ever all at once. So
Right.
we look at grade 5 and we go, this is where my focus lies.
Yes.
And text structures, they're a breakdown of figurative language.
The figurative language, I believe that comes in vocabulary. It mentions figurative language in the writing section, but it doesn't specifically say which ones. I believe it's in vocabulary where they say which figurative language goes in. Yeah. So this is under vocabulary. Grade 4 specifically mentions personification, analogy, and idiom. And grade 5 metaphors. Grade 5 metaphors. And grade 6 palindrome. Interesting.
Like,
but also use simile, metaphors, and analogies.
Yeah.
So in grade 4, they're made aware of them, and in grade 6, they're using them. Okay.
And again, lots of mentor texts out there, and figures of speech could be done via the mini lesson, one thing at a time. So I had to throw that in there.
Okay, I'll go back to your slides. Thanks for your question.
So yeah, sorry.
Oh, that's good.
So I want us to not forget certain elements of writing nonfiction. And again, a learning curve for me back in the day, nonfiction uses sidebars sometimes in the writing. So have kids practice using sidebars, and they could connect things like, here's a sidebar, myth versus fact, or truth versus misconception. Here's a resource, or this word means. So sidebars are a part of nonfiction writing. We see them, we can see them in the text we read, and we want our students to practice and include sidebars in their nonfiction writing if it asks for that, or if there's an opportunity to do that. Talk to the reader. You can add voice to informational writing using the second person point of view. You could share an inanimate object, an animal, anything like that, and give it a personality, if you will, the perspective, the feelings, the life experiences. Like the good old polar bear could be told from that perspective using facts. that's another good way to enter into and look at nonfiction. Ask questions of the reader when you write nonfiction. Create questions about the information presented that extend the reader's thinking. And you don't need many, many, many questions, but you could certainly ask someone, you could write something and say, what do you think you would do? Do you think this is a harsh method? Those kinds of pieces. Why is that third step important? Those kinds of things. So these are all mini lessons where our expectation becomes that we're going to really create some deep, real nonfiction writing, and we're reading pieces that have this in them. You share advice with your readers. So you've written something about China or something, and you might say, here's some great places to eat. Here's a great sightseeing tour that you might want to see, but the advice must be connected to the facts that are included in the work that you're doing. And I think these are important pieces to remember so that we're not just falling into perhaps that research report. So again, as I said, these are very good mini lessons for practice, for guided practice, and then have students apply one or two in the nonfiction, and that would be something I would assess for. Yes, they're challenging, but I think with the right mentor texts, with practice, with you modeling, I think you'd end up with some really little spicier nonfiction, if you will. Are there any thoughts about that?
I know we keep talking about mentor texts, and I just want to make sure that people understand what those are. So, just briefly, it's a piece of writing by an author, or it could be by you, that demonstrate what students want to be able to bring into their writing. So, it's a sample piece of writing that models the qualities that we want to see in good writing.
Thank you. That's a good point. Good point. So I'm moving into the mini lesson about nonfiction and how a mini lesson could be structured. Obviously, we're going to define nonfiction, the genre. We're going to say that it informs, it persuades, it's based on fact. We're going to say that that when we do some pre-reading questions with our students beforehand, we might say things like, what are all the things that we know about conservation? We might say, what do we know? We might say, what if? We might say, what would you do? Those are three really important question sets that get students thinking in a before reading kind of way. And I'm talking about this book called Conservation. It's a little nonfiction book. It's grade 4, I think, and it's about a report. So it comes in different sections. So it's a really good little book for understanding how to read nonfiction. It comes in sections. So we have things like Planet Under Threat, Saving the Forests, Protection in Parks. And we can look at even the first pages. Those are full of text features that we find in a lot of nonfiction. So when I talk about conservation, this is the book that I'm referring to. It's from Scholastic. Where would we read nonfiction in our own lives is a very important question that starts the thinking going. Now, someone might say, well, we read nonfiction when we read, I don't know, a flyer. And my question right after that is, and how do you know that? How do you know that that's nonfiction? So we always want to remember that question. How do you know that? What makes you think so? As we work through our focused conversation with our students about in the before reading stage. And so you can take a section with a book with a note taker. You can create a note taker, and you can say something like, what do you learn from the pink boxes with information in them? What are you learning from those? So your note taker is what you do is you take kids deliberately through with the note taker that you've organized in the way that the section is organized, and have them go through. So I might also say, what do you gather from the pictures that you're looking at without the words? What information is in here? And you do it together with your students. You might say, summarize this piece right up here in the bigger font. And what would that say in your own words? What's the essence of that component? So there are note takers are critical. Note takers are created by you so that students have a deliberate way of going through, and you ask them to go through things in a deliberate way where you think they might not go there. There's a think about it component on this page in the yellow. And it says, what kinds of natural resources do you use every day? Are they resources that can be renewed or that cannot be renewed? So I might suggest at the end, look at the think about it question on page 5 and reflect on it. Give an answer to that. And don't forget to provide evidence for what you're saying. So note takers are really, really a critical component of finding information, of doing a book walk, of doing a pre-cursory kind of look at what it is we're going to read, and then we can make better predictions. So of course you do that with your students. Now you have students do Saving the Forest, the next section, with a partner. And you do the same thing with the note taker. So now students can work together to make their way through nonfiction text and answer some questions and have a look. And what did you learn? What did you see in here that's specifically that piques your interest? That kind of thing. And then I might have students do on their own another section, and this one's called Plant Your Own Forest. And I would have them do the book walk, do the note taker, look through it, and then the ending question, which I would have them reflect on the note taker. Which text features did you find most helpful to your understanding of the text? What makes you think so? And that's has our students think about what they're doing, think about what you are reading, think about what you are learning. And of course, this whole note taker piece could certainly be a formative kind of look. You could have a look at everyone's answers and looks at the individual student, and you can do your own notes in terms of what do the kids know, what seemed to be a problem. And that's how you look at some formative assessments. So then you can apply what you saw in next day's class. Students are telling you what they find most helpful, but they didn't explain what makes them think so. That's an issue. We need to always provide evidence, whether it's right, draw, or tell, with whatever we say or do. So it's very important. The note taker is, and it doesn't need to be a big elaborate piece. It is simply you going through the parts you want your students to look at deliberately and have them take notes about it. I think note takers are really important for everything, whether you're viewing something, whether students are listening to you. And I think the whole note taking component is very much something that we need to address throughout. I did a lesson with grade 1, and we learned how to use one sticky note with fortunately on one side and unfortunately on the other side, because there's a good story. I don't even know if you can find the book, but it's called Fortunately, Unfortunately, and it's a pattern book, but then they had to do their own Fortunately, Unfortunately. So there was a little bit of that note-taking component. Certainly nothing that would happen in a junior high classroom, for instance, but there needs to be that piece. And I'm too I don't know, nasty to say, yeah, I know you don't take notes, but you're taking notes. So any other questions? But we need to teach students how to notate what they read and what they look at. So that's a really important piece, but that is how I would run that mini lesson. It's certainly going to take more than one day, little bits and pieces every day. And then you want to scour resources and things and see what you have that can be used in that way with your students. So there's a piece of that critical dive in to nonfiction, way beyond perhaps what, at least what I've seen in my career early on about the research report. And after something like this, you could also say, what do you still want to know about conservation after doing this? There's your research question. And that can be presented in any way that you choose to have your students present. And it's nonfiction writing. So that's that piece that I wanted to share with you. Here are some questions for a book walk. Now, this one, I think I sent this to Heather, but I'll double check. If you want these, I'll make sure that she gets them. But I think I sent them in July, and I'll talk to her for a book walk. And I'll also send you those sentence stems. I have the note about question stems that begin the summary process for students, which is something that's very critical here too. This was about what? So you have things like, what's the main idea of the text? What did you learn? Is there any information that you already knew? Are there any words that are unfamiliar? Do you know the meanings of these words? So these are not all of, don't use all of them, but you can certainly pick and choose a few that you would like to have students do as they go through. And this is where sticky notes come in. While you read this section, I want you to name 3 important details in the passage. So take 3 stickies out, put the sticky on what you think is an important detail, and make a note on the sticky saying, why do you think it's important? And support your answer. And do that 3 times in the text that we're looking at. Put a sticky beside 2 things that you already knew as you were reading, and put the sticky right there on the information and write down how you knew that. Why did you already know this? What's your evidence? So we can manipulate these pieces, and we teach in the meantime, the during reading component of the reading process is about think and read at the same time. And we're the ones who can negotiate that and say, while you read, I want you to. And rereading is another piece that's really critical to how our students do. But when we ask them to reread, we give them the purpose for the reread. So you've done this part, lovely. I just want you to go back and reread the text and put stickies on words that are unfamiliar to you. And you know, rereading text is a good thing. We just don't get everything from one round. And so rereading is a very important reading strategy that good readers use. If I'm stuck, I'll go back to the beginning and start again. Or if I get to a place that says, whoa, who's that character? I go back. And again, that's another important piece. And you know, if you ask your kids to create bookmarks that say what to do when you're stuck, they will tell you the things you do when you get stuck. You can ask someone, reread, start again, circle it and come back later. All, you know, so many of those. And students can have bookmarks that they created in nonfiction, in their textbooks and places like that. So there are a few other questions for a book walk that I think are pertinent. Where do you think you could find more information regarding this topic? What would you like to ask the author? If you could rename the title, what would it be? Have you read anything similar, text-to-text connections? And what pictures did you find most interesting? And you know, and did you like the text? Why or why not? It's not, you don't have to like it, but you have to explain why you don't like it. And you can say, yes, I really liked it. Why did you like it? You've got to always say what makes you think that. So I I have to let this dog out if you'll excuse me. I'm sorry.
While Irene's away, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the note takers. If you even Google note taker organizer or note taker examples, you get quite a few different forms and pages that will support students in making notes. And they do begin making notes in later elementary. That's in the curriculum as well, beginning note taking. So look at a template and create something that works in your situation.
Mhm. Yeah, tailor make it. There's something to be said for answer frames, which gosh, I should just show you this book. It's called Teaching Written Response to Text, and it's by Nancy Boyles, and I'll put it in the chat. She creates a template for how to best answer a reader response question. So what she does is she has a generic question at the top. In this case, it says, what is the structure of this text? Why do you think the author chose this? Well, they're generic questions. You can modify them. She has a space for sentence number 1 answer. Write a topic sentence that names the structure of this text and lines to do it with. Sentence number 2, write 1 or 2 sentences explaining why you think the author chose this structure. Third sentence, find and write a quote from the text to show this structure. Last sentence, write a final sentence that tells you why you do or do not think this structure makes the text more effective. And that's how students answer. And they can certainly put all of that into paragraph form when they give you the reader response. It's a very good scaffolding book in terms of this is how you answer a question properly. It is not who's your favorite character and why. Jim, because he's cool. You need a 3 or 4 sentence response to that. And she's very big on use evidence from the text to support your answer. And it's something I did not teach years ago. I just thought, well, you should know how to answer the question. Who's your favorite character and why? So these are called text structures or answer frames. And you can certainly make your own. If you're building context for something, you could ask, I'm asking you this question, here's how you need to answer it. And high flyers, even if you just said, this is what I want in your paragraph, have that as a guide and they can write freely if they wish to do so. So that's something that I would share with you. I'm going to just put her book in the chat if you're interested. But when I saw the book, I went, oh, that's what I've been missing in terms of teaching my students how to answer a question. So the next piece is about the routines that I did talk about a few on Monday, but it's so important that your teaching sequence include modeling and explaining, then guided practice, then application. The reading process, if you will, requires pre-reading. And that's those questions. What would you do if? Have you ever? What are all the things we know about? Those are 3 really good questions to get people's minds focused on what's about to happen. During reading, it's critical to have kids think and read at the same time. Now, you can highlight, you can take side notes, you can use sticky notes. And I really like sticky notes for that think and read. While I read, I want you to always ask, how do you know? Regardless of whether the kids are talking or writing or working with each other. And when we provide note-taking strategies for our students, you need to take notes while you're talking to each other. So if we have focused conversation protocols that we've shown our students, that we ask our students to use, you need to take notes during the discussion. You can learn things from discussing things with other people, and that needs to be included. Here I got my note taker. Let's talk about this, whether it's jigsaws, inside, outside, any of those pieces. And reread is a very important component, as I just said. And I did talk to you about the no excuses list. And that's something that you could have a no excuses list in math because it might differ from language arts, but it's important to show that that accessibility to what you're responsible for, because until you do those things, I'm not ready to look at your work. And once you've done that, then I will take the work and assess it for the things that I need to look for, that I need you to show me that you know. And so that's why a no excuses list, helps to I don't know, control that, put the accountability back on the student for certain things. So that's that piece. And what kinds of student activities do we use when we look at teaching nonfiction reading and writing? Well, certainly glossary of terms is there, but whenever I have my kids, find meanings of things, I always have them write the definition in their own words, because that shows me that they understand or don't. So it's one thing to just copy it from the glossary, but we really need to look at those and maybe as a class create student-friendly definitions. I talked about side-by-side books, and the text scavenger hunt would be something that you would create based on the text students will read. And it will talk about things like go to page 9 and tell me what the biggest snake is in the world. Go to page 1 and tell me what that graph is saying to you. So it's those kinds of pieces that we want students to do. So you make them go to places where they might ignore, they might not look. We want to make sure that we have a nonfiction summary template, which is certainly main idea, topic sentence, detail 1, detail 2, etc., etc. So a nonfiction, just like you have a narrative summary, plot, character, setting, you can do that. We're all familiar, I'm thinking, with the KWL chart. And I was reading something a while ago that spoke to switching around some of the process to a KLW chart, so that knowledge would be, what do you, let's say Australia. So the KLW chart says, what do you know about Australia? The next piece is read this article about Australia. Then the L says, what have you learned about Australia? List 3 things, whatever. Doing it that way helps kids to create a question. What would you still like to know about Australia? So you switch around the KWL to KLW. What do you know? Read. What did you learn? Now, what question do you still have about this? Another way that we can go into writing something or finding out something about our question. I found the KWL chart to be, I guess it just lost its magic at some point. So what do I know about Australia? We could do that together. What would you like to know? Says to me, I don't know. I don't know anything about Australia. And then sort of what have you learned? So I really encourage the use of KLW, because you're going to get more deeper sort of thinking out of that from your students. Certainly doing a nonfiction book study would be something you would do in your year. And I would have subject-specific magazines in my classroom. So things like, maybe Maclean's and Time, maybe Scientific American, depending on what you're teaching. But I would see if I could have magazines that are subject-specific in my classroom so that students would have access to that. And I know that we're all digital and all that sort of piece, but there's something about finding a magazine and flipping through it. When technology first came around, my good friend was a librarian at a high school here in Edmonton. And the kids would line up and wait to use the computer standing right next to the shelf where those books were, but they were lined up to use the computer. So she found that really frustrating, but the ins and outs of that. But I've seen magazine, racks in a science classroom, and they're right there, National Geo, that kind of thing. It's really quite neat. And I've seen students go there and have a look. That could even be part of your silent reading component. I really like the notion of centers. That is, go here and work on your spelling rules, go here and read nonfiction only out of magazines, and so on. And I know there are centers, of course, for K-6 perhaps, but I'm playing with the idea, what would a center look like in junior high and senior high? What would the name be for it? So there's no eye rolling going on. But I think it's a very interesting question. What would that look like? Is everyone's okay? Good. Okay. So we're going to look at how to assess something like this. And we talked about rubrics yesterday and on Monday, but I would have a nonfiction text and have students write a reader response to it. What is the text about? That's summarizing the text. What does this text remind you of? Use evidence from the text to support your answer. That's that relate. And the reflect component is, do you think this text is important for others to read? Use evidence from the text to support your answer. This tells me, whether it's formative or summative, this tells me the level of comprehension you had when I gave you that one-page news article or something. So this is what this tells me, is what's this text about? If the student rehashes the whole thing, that's not a good summary. What does this text remind you of? Nothing is not an acceptable answer. And, do you think this text is important? Even if you don't, you still have to use evidence from the text to support your answer. And I would mark that with a 3-point rubric. I would mark it, I would look at it as an exit slip. I would say there's 20 minutes, and I would collect them all and have a read through. So that's something that is an important piece to know where your students are at with nonfiction reader response and with other pieces. So I would have like an autobiography study where students would read and then they would write their own. We could have a short unit on recipes, and students could write a recipe for I don't know, love on Valentine's Day or something like that. But whenever we choose the categories that I showed you at the beginning of the slide, you can pick those as genres or themes to study, and we are reading about them and writing about them, and we are following the structure. And that's the important piece, is texts have a structure to them, all texts. Okay, next is Trisha. Oh, wait, sorry, you're after this one. The skills and procedures is what I would assess on that previous slide that I showed you. Determine how the structure of text can support the organization and communication of ideas or information. Respond to text by summarizing main ideas and providing supporting evidence from self, other texts, or the world. So you are doing this with your students, but you can also assess how well students are doing that based on the previous slide, in terms of, here's a short story about mangoes, etc., etc., and this is what I want you to look at.
Thanks, Irene. That reminds me of, we did a retell, relate, reflect sheet a couple of years ago, actually, that would have been useful for this too. So I am going to take you to our ARPDC website, and show you a few resources that relate directly to the things that Irene's talking about today. There are two places. So one is about hybrid texts and one is about writing. And since I've clicked on the writing one first, that's where we're going to go. So resources for teaching writing. If you have a look at this resource, some of our colleagues created that. There's a slideshow that I won't go through, but you might want to have a look at that if it's something that you would like more support with. It's a helpful writing resource for teachers. I need to go back one page, go right to the very start. So I'm also looking for the hybrid text. We have not talked about that very much, and it relates to what Irene's talking about. If students write, for example, a poem, and they write a poem about a factual object or an animal or something like that. And the sidebars would be information on the sides of the page that would be factual. So that would make it a hybrid text because it has both poetry and facts. So fiction and nonfiction on the same page. All right. Yeah, maybe I should go back and tell you how I got to this point. So if I go to just, I showed it quickly yesterday, but if I go to just arpdc.ab.ca, and then I find new curriculum resources, and I go to ELAL, I get to this page, and then I have to scroll down to find the pieces that I'm looking for. And at this moment, we're talking about the hybrid texts. So in the hybrid text resource, there's a video by one of our colleagues explaining what a hybrid text is. And then there's a couple of guides to success, which I did bring up yesterday. I'm just going to show you both of those examples as well. So a guide to success is a way of doing assessment. This is a guide to success for creating a hybrid text, and you have access to this on the website. I'll open it up a little bit more. So the requirements, what do you need to do? You need to highlight key ideas or inspirations from your nonfiction text to include in your poem or narrative writing. And you need to create a poem in the structure of your choosing that connects to your given nonfiction text. So that's what this teacher has decided is required in this task. And then you could add in what needs to be done to make it an excellent piece of writing. So that is one of the guides to success that's available here. And I'll show you the other one, the guide to success. Research, write, and craft. Open it up further. So the requirements for this task would be to research facts about the chosen topic from at least 3 different sources. And I'm not sure which grade that's connected to, but it seems to me to be a little bit higher than grade 4, maybe a 5 or 6 outcome. Record citations, which means take jot notes using the template. So the teacher's given a template, and then write a paragraph, including important facts about your chosen topic. And then lastly, create a poem in the structure of your choosing that reflects your research topic. So they have both nonfiction and fiction in the same piece of writing, and that makes it a hybrid text. So those are available for you to download, and you will be able to manipulate that too. All right. the other one, I think there was another resources for teaching writing that I wanted to show you. So let's just make sure. Oh, it's not letting me go back. Why not? There we go. Okay. The other one is called Resources for Teaching Writing.
Trisha,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
I have a question about the hybrid text.
Yeah.
Would you consider historical fiction as hybrid, or is that too integrated to be considered hybrid? Like, does it have to be more distinct separation of the fiction, nonfiction?
I believe that it has to have some like a glossary or some fact as well. Do you know what I mean? It has
Yeah, and
to,
that's what I was wondering, is if it had to be more kind of distinctly like nonfiction features as well.
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a single text that weaves both together. And of course, the design elements would come from both places.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because I could see my kids asking.
Okay, thank you. And have a look at that slide deck too. Maybe there will be more information in there too.
Thanks.
Ah,
I did have a quick scan through it, but I'll look at it in more detail.
okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go to these resources for teaching writing. Nope, it just has the slideshow. Sorry, I thought there was another piece in there. I guess I just wanted to make you aware that that is there. Those two pieces, the hybrid text and the resources for teaching writing. Irene, were you able to put the title of that book into the
I
chat?
did. Yes,
Okay,
I did. And I put in 3 other pieces that I need to explain. I just,
Okay.
with regards to resources to help.
All right, I'll send it back to you then. Those were just the 2 pieces that I wanted to show at the ARPDC website.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So
Maybe I'll stop share for a minute. So you can...
in the chat, I put MyPad, MIPAD, which is just create a template, a note taker, where I've had my students into groups of local news, national news, international and provincial news. And I've had them fill out the MyPad note taker, where M is for map. So students need to write in words where the story is located. I is what is the issue. Students need to summarize it. P is from whose perspective is this written. A is who would agree with this perspective and why. And D is who would disagree with this perspective and why. And I would have students work on that. And then on a Friday or a Thursday, they would get into their groups of local, provincial, national, international, and share what they found out with each other, and then switch the roles around for next Friday. It's a really good way to deal with current events, and it's a really good way to make build background knowledge for your students, and a really good way for them to kind of focus on what's going on in the world around them. So that's what MyPad is that I put in the chat.
Irene,
Yes,
what does the M stand for?
MAP, M-A-P, where
Thank you.
students write out that this is, west of Edson, 28 miles. It's not draw map or anything. You have to use words to describe where the story is located.
Thank you.
Yeah, good challenge, I think. And then oh, go ahead.
Oh, now you're being asked what the I stands for.
Okay, so M is map.
Okay.
I is issue. Summarize the issue. P is perspective. From whose perspective was this written? A is who would agree with this perspective and why. And D is who would disagree with this perspective and why.
Thanks, Irene. I've never used that one.
Yeah. It asks them to look at perspective, to summarize, using words to talk about directions and so on. So it's a very good piece. And again, 4 people could be, like I said, local, provincial, national, international, and then you switch roles for next week.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard of, I call it News Ella. Some people have said News ELA. I put that in the chat too. It's a place to go where you can get themed news articles written in 3 or 4 different levels so that your students can understand what the article is about. And it comes in things like there's weather articles, science articles, math articles, that kind of thing. So you want to sign up and go in there. And one that I really love is the New York Times. And this is, I'll put that in the chat too. You need to go to what's going on in this picture. What's going on in this picture. And it'll show you a picture, like a photograph, where students will infer what's going on. So what do you guys think this is about? Why do you think so? Evidence, evidence. What happens is, and when you sign up, it's free, but what happens is on Monday, you get the picture and students talk about it. And then Thursday, you get the reveal. This is really what this picture was about. So it's about making inferences. It's about really looking at a photograph. It could be a writing prompt for that matter. But because you sign up, you get all the past reveals all together. So you could even do a lesson with what do you think is in the picture, what's happening, and then right away you could pull up the reveal and say, this is what happened. This is what this picture is really about. Again, it's like a question of the day. You could almost use that at the beginning to say, well, let's look at this picture and see what it tells us. They're practicing inferring, which is an important skill in everything that they do.
Excellent. All right, Lana.
Well, thank you, Lana.
Thanks.
And I just click in New York Times or even what's going on in this picture and it'll pop up.
Okay.
And just one more point for good luck.
Yep.
Because nonfiction is really focused on in grades 4, 5, and 6 does not preclude reading and sharing lots of nonfiction with K-3. Lots of reading and talking about it to help build that sort of component, even though it's not specific, but it's a good support system. It's a good background knowledge building for when they do have to look at things. Thanks, Lana. That's great. I appreciate it.
Great. Do you want to go back to your slides, Irene?
Yes. Yep. If there are any.
We're almost at the end. Yeah.
So, so just for some think time, and perhaps we could see some of it on the chat. What does the integration and teaching of nonfiction look like in your classroom? Well, maybe I want you to sort of think about and share what you plan to do with nonfiction instruction in your school year this year coming up. And maybe you can just throw that out there. You might keep the unit you have, you like it, you might add something, you might reconsider, maybe something came up and you want to use MyPad on a regular basis, something like that. So I'll give you a minute and I'd really like to see what you have to say. Christina, I hope your son's okay.
Hope that goes well. This would also be a fine time for any questions too.
Yes, exactly.
Does anyone want to
What
add
do you plan
anything?
to use? Stop, start, continue. I really want to do a biography book club in the second half of the year. I'm excited. Lovely. Yay.
Like
We have a subscription. Oh, there's so much. I love it.
dynamic classroom.
A subscription to Dynamic Classroom Weekly News. These strategies would work so well with it. Is there a recommendation resource method to teach? Well, Alice, you can email me because I do have a couple of formats if you wish. And starting with biography is a good thing. Just, yeah, why not? I think that's a great idea. I have some templates, but they're not necessarily recommended, but there are some templates that I can share that you'd want to manipulate to suit your needs more. Okay, so I think what I'll do is, Tricia, will I send some of these pieces to Heather and ask her to put them on the site?
Yes, that's exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And it'll be an email.
Okay, I
Oh.
always did a research project on a sea animal, which we usually work on for a month or so. Would you rather that I replace this with ideas shared in the morning? I think so. I think that we might want to study sea animals and then have students develop a question about sea animals that they still have, and that is how they would pursue their research. And then the presentation would be, in any way, shape, or form. It could be written, it could be oral, it could be visual, is what I would do. The recording is going to be shared.
Yes. And I think that they're asking if we could put a couple of templates in with that.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure. So I'll send that to Heather in an email.
Okay, perfect.
And then she'll put it on the site. And it is the templates for nonfiction note-taking.
Yes.
And okay, I will do that.
All right. Well,
And your big treat is that we have 7 minutes left. So talk amongst yourselves. No, I'm kidding.
Wrapping
Tricia.
up.
Darlene, thank you. Tricia, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to let you know that these are our email addresses. Oh, thank you, Lana. Thanks for coming and thanks for contributing in the chat.
Yes.
I appreciate that. Your last chance to ask questions. Otherwise, just thank you so much for joining us. I'll stop sharing. Thanks for being here. I hope that you have a great school year.
Yes, my
No
sentiments exactly.
session tomorrow.
Tomorrow is beer on a dime. Excellent. Darlene, you know my email. That sounds great. Cornell is fine. Jot notes are good. There are many other ways to do that. So I think that those two are fine. And there are other techniques. I think we need to show our kids, there are many ways to take notes. Now pick one that you're comfortable with.
All right. That's
Lovely.
great here. Thanks, Juliet.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Well, Irene?
Well, I'm going to miss you, my friend. I don't get hugs anymore, so
I know, and I'm a hugger.
That's going to be my thing.
Yeah.
And I wish you all the best, the best, the best. And I hope our paths cross at some point somewhere.
I hope so
Because
too.
I've really, really enjoyed your company.
Thank you. It has been great working with you.
Yes. Stalk her. Darlene says stalk her. I might just do that,
Feel free. I'm on lots of social media.
We're going for a ride. We're going south.
All right. Well, I'll end. Oh, I'm recording this as well. That's great. I'll stop the recording.
Superb.